Good morning and welcome to you all. I appreciate your all being here. Well, we have this morning the pleasure of having Susthama Kim talk with us about the topic of faith. Susthama is the head of the Amida Order based in the UK and practices in the Pure Land tradition. She is also an actively practicing psychotherapist and worked for many years as a chaplain. And above and beyond all that, she lives with her partner and her 2 children in London. So we're very happy to have her back to talk on the topic of faith in Buddhist practice. Thank you so much, Susthama, for being here.
So I'd like to share with you a couple of sutras to give you an idea of the role of faith in Buddhism. A sutra is the main word that we use for a story or scripture that's come down to us through the Buddhist canon, the Pali Canon. And so sutra means thread. And like threads, we use them to weave. And so these sutras are a way of weaving things together, like knowledge, like truths, in a way that we feel we can actually inhabit and wear them. And like any sacred text, sutras are a source of wisdom, they're a source of revelation, in particular about something that is other, and they offer us lessons for daily life, for values, for how to organize human instincts. And the one thing I find about Buddhist sutras is that they don't just tell us what to do, but how to do something. So sometimes they can be very practical. Other times they can be a little bit more mystical, fantastical. So we can find pretty much everything in the Buddhist canon. So I'd like to start with a more straightforward sutra that's found in the Pali Canon and the Majjhima Nikaya. And this one is in the Majjhima Nikaya, which is known as the Middle Length Sutras. And it's chapter 95, and it's called With Kanki. So Kanki is a Brahmin ruler, and he is instrumental in the sutra, but it's a younger Brahmin that is intrigued and is asking all the questions. So the sutras are usually sort of structured in a way that is similar to any story. We start with a setting, we start with characters, and so this sutra starts with in a place called Uposatha. And Uposatha is a village in the Kosalin county where this Brahmin Kanki is the ruler. He's the top dog. And one day he sees a lot of Brahmins going, and he wonders, well, where are they going? And so one of his friends says they're going to go and see a recluse, Gautama. And so they use the recluse Gautama to refer to the Buddha. So it gives you an idea of where the Buddha is during his ministry. He's established enough to be known as someone who is teaching a Dharma that is really important, and he's attracting a lot of Brahmins, a lot of scholars, other important practitioners in the spiritual life, but he's not referred to as the Buddha. He's just referred to as the recluse, Gautama. And Kenki has heard about him, so he says, okay, yeah, I'm going to go too. He doesn't want to miss out on whatever this recluse has to teach. But there's other Brahmins who say, no, don't go to him. Ask him to come to you. It's not proper for you to go to him. And then Kenki thinks, well, no, this is, that's ridiculous. And he then argues with them about why it's actually better for him to go and see the recluse. And he lists all the qualities and virtues of Gautama. And so I think, okay, fair enough. He's established and well-known enough to know that this is someone who deserves some respect from some of the highest people in society. So he goes, and once he gets there, he sees the Buddha and a group of senior Brahmins having a discussion, and there's a young Brahmin there who keeps interrupting, and Kenki hears Gautama rebuking this young Brahmin, saying, please stop interrupting your questions, just listen. And then Kenki thinks, oh, but and Kenki intervenes and says, well, actually, this young Brahmin has studied the Vedas enough to know what he's talking about. Give him a chance. And so then Gautama, it's written as a way that, in a way that suggests that already Gautama can read the minds of others and can see that this young Brahmin really wants his attention. And so he then deliberately looks at this young Brahmin, and that young Brahmin thinks, oh, he's looking at me now, I better ask a good question. And so then the young Brahmin asks, and it starts with one question and then leads to further questions. And so I'll let me just to the question. So his first question is, well, actually, the first question isn't really a question. It's checking to see whether Gautama agrees with this statement. And the statement is, the ancient hymns of the Brahmins are true and everything else is false. And then Gautama answers by saying, have you heard any single individual Brahmin say that this is what I know, this is what I see, and only this is true, and everything else is wrong and worthless? To which the young Brahmin says, no, actually, no one's ever said it like that. And then Gautama goes further into this and says, there's two positions, and these two positions are, and he lists 5 factors. So what you'll find in the sutra is that there's a lot of lists of things, and I won't go into everything, otherwise that'll take up the entire time. But basically, in a nutshell, he points out that one position is for someone to take the side of saying that this is true when it really isn't true. It's false, it's hollow, there's nothing substantial, there's been no empirical evidence, there's no experience of it. But this person takes a position that this is true. The other position is based on coming actually hollow and false. Okay, it says it's stable, so I'm just gonna, can you hear me okay? Okay, good. And so then the Buddha says, if a person has a conviction, but says, my faith is this, my experience is this, but doesn't then say, only this is true and everything else is wrong. The Buddha explains that in saying it that way, this is how we safeguard or preserve the truth. And he then goes on to say, I describe this as safeguarding the truth, but it's not yet an awakening to the truth, or it's not discovering the truth. And so the young Brahmin is hooked and he's interested, and he goes, oh, well, I'm not so interested in safeguarding the truth. I actually want to awaken to the truth. So can you tell me how one awakens to the truth? And so then the Buddha is able to develop his teaching a little bit further. And he says, okay, and bear in mind, this is my abbreviated version because it's quite a long sutra, but I'm going to condense it. So in effect, he tells the young Brahmin, well, consider a monk that's living in a village who's dependent on a village. And you go and you want to know, is what this monk is teaching and practicing good? So you go and you observe, and you want to see how he behaves and also see what he teaches. When on observing that monk, you notice that there's no greed, no hate, no delusion, then you can trust that this monk has something good and wise to teach. And with that, seeing and observing this monk behaving that way, what arises is a trust or confidence, conviction, enough to make you want to go and visit him, to get close to him. And by getting close to him, and in the sutra it says, give ear or lend an ear. So before we can even hear, we need to give an ear. Giving an ear, you can then hear the Dharma. And then hearing the Dharma, you can remember the Dharma. When you remember it, you can penetrate the meaning or examine the meaning. And by examining that, you can ponder the teaching. When you ponder the teachings, then desire arises, or a kind of zeal. With the arising of desire comes willingness. With willingness comes contemplating it. And with contemplation comes striving or exertion. So there's so many different processes happening within the person that goes from a position of just a basic faith or conviction to actually striving himself. But it's not just faith to striving, it's faith to visiting, to giving ear, to listening, to hearing, to memorizing it, to examining it, pondering it, contemplating it. So there's so many micro steps that the Buddha is actually pointing at that we wouldn't necessarily know just by observing someone's process as they get involved in developing a kind of practice or understanding. And then he says, to this extent, there is an awakening to the truth. To this extent, one awakens to the truth. I describe this as an awakening to the truth, but it's not yet the final attainment of the truth. And so each time Gautama answers a question, he adds on a little bit more. You know, it's almost like he knows enough to sort of lay a bait, and the young Brahmin gets hooked, and he gives him the answer to that question. But again, you know, preserving the truth or safeguarding the truth wasn't enough. He wanted to find out, how does one actually go further and awaken to the truth? And then again, the Buddha says this is how you awaken to the truth, but it's not the final attainment of the truth. And so again, the young Brahmin is, okay, well, it's not enough to just awaken to the truth. I want to actually finally attain the truth. And so then the young Brahmin is intrigued and wants to know, well, what, Master Gautama, then is the quality that's most helpful for the attainment of the truth? And then the Gautama gives his answer, and again, it's a list of things. And he says, what helps is exertion or striving. But what helps exertion or striving is contemplation and scrutiny. But what helps scrutiny is the application of the will, or to be willing. But what helps this willingness is a zeal or desire. And what helps the desire to develop in us is a reflective acceptance, or to ponder. And what helps this pondering is an examination or a penetration of the meaning. And what helps this examination of the meaning is to remember the teachings. And what helps to remember is to hear it. And what helps to hear it is to give your ear to it. And what helps to give your ear to someone is to pay respects or to become closer to someone. And what helps to become closer to someone is to go and visit them. And what helps to visit them is to have faith in that person. And so at the top of the list of a lot of these qualities that the Buddha is saying we need, it all tends to point to faith or prasada. Without a sense of trust in either a person and what they're teaching or the teaching itself, we wouldn't feel drawn to even go close and listen. So that is a pretty straightforward teaching or sutra from the Pali Canon. And now I'd like to move on to another sutra, which is completely different, written in a different style, almost in a different time, called the Larger Pure Land Sutra. And this Larger Pure Land Sutra is in the Mahayana tradition. And what you'll find with Mahayana sutras is they are a lot more colorful, more fantastical, more supernatural. There's a lot of stuff where you read and you think, what's going on here? It's not straightforward. You don't really get a sense of, oh, I can do that. Whereas with the Pali Canon, which is found in more of the Theravadan tradition, you think, oh yeah, that's pretty straightforward. I can understand exactly how to cultivate those things. So with the Larger Pure Land Sutra, how do we understand it then? How do we take a sutra that isn't as straightforward? So this sutra starts with Ananda. Ananda was his attendant, and Ananda notices the Buddha. And in this sutra, he's very much referred to as the Buddha. The Master Gautama, recluse Gautama, is not mentioned at all in the Larger Pure Land Sutra. He's very much established as the enlightened, the awakened one. And so Ananda sees how radiant he is one day, and he goes, "Woof, you're looking really, radiant, you're glowing. Why? What are you thinking of?" And so the Buddha answers, in a way, he answers by telling an allegory. He answers by every way a good fairy tale starts. And he starts with, well, in a distant age, a long, long time ago. So already you get the sense of being drawn into something that is archetypal, something that has been there for forever, that was true back then and it's true now. And he goes into talking about Buddhists that have always been around, that have always existed, and going back far enough. And in a way, what the Buddha is saying is he's not really bothered about whether we understand it at all. He's kind of saying it as, this is my experience. This is how I see it. So he's presenting it in a way that is about him and his experience. And the allegory, when we get to the story of of the Buddha that happened to be the Buddha that this monk, or this it was a royal person, had heard of and then went to go and see, you can see similarities between the life of the Buddha and what the Buddha then did, but in a very different way, because the standard story of Siddhartha Gautama doesn't include him actually coming across a Buddha. But in the larger Pure Land Sutra, you have this person from a wealthy, almost royal background, who could have been a king, who then comes across the teachings of this Buddha, meets the Buddha of his time, and is so inspired by what he has met with, by what he has seen, by the potential that he has sort of had insight into, so that he leaves it all behind. And this could have been king, then leaves the palace, becomes a monk called Dharmakara. And Dharmakara then has, is going through all the difficulties and challenges that he faces. He wants to know how he can create a Pure Land. What does he have to do? How long will it take? And in a way, you could almost imagine it could be the Buddha talking about his own process of, well, we don't know what he actually went through, but if he did, these might be some of the issues that he was grappling with. And the things that come out of the sutra are very much things that have to do with what it would look like after one becomes enlightened. And it's not so fantastical at this point. It's very simple in the things that he's saying is about praising all the other Buddhas, giving offerings to other Buddhas, being grateful for other Buddhas. So there's a sense of being surrounded in the presence of all these spiritual beings, never alone, even though he's very much alone, but always connected to something other than himself that is giving him the source of love, of acceptance, of wisdom, of courage, so that no matter what the obstacles are, no matter what the hardships are, he knows that he can do it, not because of his own efforts, but because he is helped by the myriad Buddhas in the spiritual world. So it's very much his story about his faith in the Tathagata, in the Buddhas, in the universe, that maybe when he started out, he wasn't as open or aware of the presence of something other that was actually helping him along his journey to enlightenment. But then as someone who had practiced and who was giving teachings throughout his ministry, he he's starting to develop this sense of gratitude, of acknowledging that he could never have done it on his own. And how arrogant it is almost for him to think that he could have done it on his own. And so, and I think this is also an acknowledgement of a maturing and evolving person from thinking that we can do it on our own, and we are doing it on our own when we're young, to, as an older person, seeing that, oh, actually, we had so much help from so many different things that we weren't aware of when we were younger. And so I see these sutras as evolving and as all sort of saying the same thing, even though they're presented in such different contrasting ways. But the sense that we can learn from so many things that are other than us, and that they're always there to guide us, to help us, and how instrumental it is for us to have that trust in whatever it is. But that trust is, and the interesting thing about faith is that I'm not sure if it's fair to say that there is such a thing as blind faith. I think faith is something that we feel when we've observed something, when we've felt in touch with something. And it's almost, it's very difficult actually to have faith if we didn't have enough of a felt sense or experience of something. So I'm not sure. Anyway, this is where, I'm kind of hoping that we can have more of a conversation about faith and how it feels to you. Because I know one of the things about these larger these Mahayana sutras is the sense of how can you cultivate faith? And there is a lot of worry now in society that I feel about, is this not just blind faith? So